Second hour with our friend and colleague Joe Madison talking about how he's going on a hunger strike to encourage Congress to blow up the filibuster, or at least drill a hole in it, so that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act can be passed. There's also the For the People Act, which has been kind of set aside now. You know, there's a lot on the table here. I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the nuts and bolts of these pieces of legislation themselves, particularly the John Lewis Voting Act. In my opinion, we're screwed without it, and yet it may not quite go as far as we need. On the line with us is journalist, investigative journalist Greg Palast. GregPalast.com is his website. Greg_Palast on Twitter. Hey, my friend, I think I just gave you a promotion, but...
Oh, I wasn't going to announce my campaign for months.
So the John Lewis Voting Act, I was surprised to learn, I learned this from you, that it only covers a handful of states. I thought that by this point in time, we would have figured out that it's not just the South that is trying to suppress, by and large, the black vote, but in general, the vote of young people, Social Security voters, you know, college-age voters, and of course, minorities across the country.
Yeah, okay. First of all, we have all these bills flying around. There was the For the People Act, which, to be very frank, was kind of like overhyped. It was like, I remember back in 2003, we passed the Help America Vote Act, you know, when George Bush was helping us vote, which should have been a signal that that wasn't too good. It did pass with the Congressional Black Caucus's help, and it ended up with Jim Crow having a few new tricks to play.
It did some good things, but it also handed $6 billion to the states to buy voting machines, as I recall.
Yes, and it required centralizing the voter data and not only authorizing but requiring states to begin central purges of their voter file. Devastating, and we ended up with second-class ballots called the provisional ballots. 2.7 million people shunted to provisional ballots, which and 1 million of those get disqualified. Almost all of them black and by the way, Asian American voters are the big group hit by having their ballots thrown out, their provisionals. So it turned out to be this wonderful voting rights reform of 2003 turned out to be actually a negative, a Jim Crow disaster. We don't want to repeat that. But I have to say the John Lewis bill, of all the three bills out there, is absolutely something that would completely help because it would restore Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And what that means is it would restore preclearance. You're going to play games, for example, Cobb County, Georgia, in the days before. Yeah, that was Newt Gingrich's district.
Yeah, he was my congressman.
What shocked the Cobb County burghers is that Ossoff, Warnock, and Biden all won Newt Gingrich's county, Cobb County. So they said, well, what do we do for the runoff for the Senate? Well, that's easy. There's 11 early voting stations where most people voted. And so we'll close 6 of the 11, all 6 in black precincts, all six. And if the John Lewis Act were in effect already, that could not have happened because what you have to do, preclearance is a fancy term saying you got to, if you're going to play games, change your voting systems, change your hours, close voting stations, you have to send it to the Justice Department with a statement that it has no negative effect on voters of color or by gender or age. Obviously, that would not have happened. Now, of course, the seal was overcome in the election on January 5, but SB 202 in Georgia has made things worse. So no question, SB 202 is the Georgia bill that added new Jim Crow tactics and cut early voting hours, et cetera. This could not go through if we had the John Lewis bill. But you're right, as I signaled to you, because very few people actually read these bills, Tom. That's why you pay me the big bucks. 0. But okay, I'm not going to complain. But I do actually read the bills. And if you look at the John Lewis bill, it really only applies at the moment, if it passes, to about 8 states: Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia. Yeah, I didn't memorize it. I read it. In other words, if you're in a Jim Crow state like Arizona, well, that's a Jose Crow state, or in Ohio or Wisconsin, where they play horrific racially biased voting games, You can be whistling, I'm glad I'm not in Dixie, because you're off the hook. You don't have to pre-clear your games. As we mentioned on this program, there's a new massive purge system which has gone wild called ERIC, and it was one of the things that almost cost Joe Biden Wisconsin. It was blocked. I did a analysis for ACLU and Black Voters Matter, found out it was highly biased, and so it was blocked at least for the presidential election, this last one. But Biden only won that state by 10,000 votes. If you don't stop this stuff, Wisconsin's gone. Michigan's gone. Don't discount the fact that Virginia, which is on this list for preclearance, that the Democrats lost Virginia, but in part, not all of it, but in part because of a massive attack on the voter rolls in Virginia.
How did that happen with a Democratic governor?
Well, they've and we see this in North Carolina too, where they have a very weak board of elections, which is still in the hands of the Jim Crow operatives in North Carolina. You still see in Virginia problems. In other words, it's not necessarily up to the governor, though the governor and the legislature, which the Democrats have just lost control of the legislature. They did make early voting easier. They did make mail-in voting easier. They eased some of the nasty requirements in Virginia, just nasty.
Right, this was Ralph Northam's work.
Yeah, but it was obviously it was not. Look, they have so many games that they play. I told you about closing the voting stations, the massive purges. But right now, we're looking at these 5 states are the only ones that would have to pre-clear. That is, say, hey, listen, we promise this ain't Jim Crow. I know we're only closing, voting stations in black areas, but, don't worry about that. And, of course, the goofy things like no water. So what happens is you create long, long lines, hours long, and then you make it a felony crime to hand someone a bottle of water. Now, it's, the problem is that the Supreme Court has already said you can't pick out certain states for a federal law. It has to be really strongly justified. And Justice Kennedy, who was the swing vote, had suggested to the Obama administration, to their Solicitor General, he said, listen, why don't we just apply preclearance to every state? Because New York City, by the way, which was under preclearance, because they always refused until the Voting Rights Act to print any ballots in Spanish. So New York pre-clears all its changes, and it said that's not a big deal. We send a letter saying, we're moving voting stations or we got new voting machines or whatever. It's not a big deal to let people know that we're making changes in voting systems. In fact, it ought to be public. That shouldn't be secret and sneaky. Mm-hmm. So it was suggested by New York City. It was suggested by Justice Kennedy. But the progressives have been afraid to say we have to apply voting rights conditions to every state. Well, like I said, I've reported for you from Ohio, right, from Wisconsin, Michigan, and frankly, California.
So, Greg, I doubt they're going to rewrite this. If that's what you're lobbying for. Does the Freedom to Vote Act, the one that Joe Manchin negotiated with Lisa Murkowski, and she voted for, does that solve this problem?
No, not even close. I mean, one of the problems is we're going to have to rely now on 2 things. One, the Justice Department, and two, to be much more aggressive than it's been. It's been first of all, a big change from Trump. I don't want to say nothing's changed. It's been huge. They did sue the Justice Department to reverse or to eliminate much of SB 202, that horrible new Georgia law. And that's important because, remember, Reverend Senator Warnock is running for re-election next year. Yep. And but it doesn't cut out all the things like we went over how one individual in Georgia challenged 32,000 voters. That stuff will not be blocked under any of these laws, and neither will the Justice Department's suit stop that. Here's what I'm concerned with. I heard Joe Biden on CNN say, and he begins with always, "Here's the deal." So here was his deal. He says, I can't go after the filibuster on voting rights because that will cost me votes on my economic program. Well, that may be short-sighted because if you don't have a democratically elected Congress, you won't have a Democratic Congress. And, to kind of paraphrase Ben Franklin, those who would give up voting rights for a budgetary gain deserve neither. I'm very worried.
Yeah, yeah. It concerns me too, and you know, although this is what we have right now, we've got to get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and I think the Freedom to Vote Act passed. I mean, you know, we just have to do that at the very least. But Greg, I'm with you that we need more. We absolutely need more.
The devil's in the details, and he gets to vote.
Yeah, there you go. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com is the website, Greg_Palast, one of the nation's great reporters. Thank you, Greg.
You're very welcome.